and then the next thing, and this is where I definitely want to caution you not to go into analysis paralysis. This is just to help you, okay? Check food groups. In My Place for Nutrition, and Vicki is the one who actually asked me to mention this. At the very beginning of every food group in My Place for Nutrition, it says 1 serving equals approximately, and that's where that first column came from. Okay, that's what we based the food plan on, was that each serving would be approximately that amount. So if you consistently have grains that are over 80 or consistently have dairy that's over 90, then you're going to obviously go off of, you're going to be eating more calories than what the plan says. So this is the average of what it is. And then I'm giving you a little bit more information there about what's the content of that. And that's what we're going to come to a little bit later. It'll help you, those of you who are numbers people and like detail. You're going to love this. Those of you who hate it, just think about the calories. That's going to be enough for you probably. So don't go into paralysis. Okay, so let's practice. This is an example of just I pulled it off of Google Images, Nature Valley Trail Mix Fruit and Nut Bar. We see these a lot. You know, we probably bought them before or eaten them before. I think there's a type of one in the bookstore. I can't remember the brand. It may not be the exact same one, but there's one in there. And we talked a little earlier about 2 things we're going to look at, the nutrition facts and the ingredients. We're going to start with the ingredients because that tells us what group we're going to kind of figure out that this is, okay? So the first thing on these ingredients is what? Whole grain oats, right? And then the next thing's corn syrup. So we know that by weight, the ingredients go down. And so the first thing is the biggest thing, and then the last thing's in there like the natural flavors and all that, tocopherols, whatever that is. They're tiny. Okay, they're at the very end. So we know this is going to be a grain product, right? Because the first thing in it is a grain. Okay, now if you'll look back at your chart that I gave you, how many calories are in 1 grain serving? 80, right? Do we have 80 here? What do we have? We have 140. So obviously we've got more than a grain, okay? So also one thing I want you to look at is under that chart, it tells you how many grams of carbohydrate are in a grain serving. Can y'all look back at that chart? How many grams of carbohydrate are in there? 15. So that'll give us an idea. Let's look at the carbohydrates there. How many are there? 25. So that's more than 15, right? Some of that is probably from that second ingredient there, the corn syrup, not just the oats. So if you do that, why don't we say, okay, well, it's not quite 2 grain servings, but it's more than 1. So why don't we say 1.5? So if we say 1.5 grain servings, it's 80 plus 40 more would be what? 120. So you're at 120. Okay, then we've got a little bit other stuff there we need to look at. There's some fat in there, isn't there, on that nutrition facts panel? And if you look back at that chart I gave you, we didn't allow for any fats in the grains. Grains don't have any by nature, okay? So if there's fat in here, it's not from the grain. So that's the good thing for that chart is for. So there's how much fat? 4 grams, okay, and how many grams of fat are in a teaspoon of oil that is on that chart? 5, right? So, I would probably just round it up and just go ahead and say 5. I mean, one teaspoon of oil. So 1 teaspoon of oil and 1.5 grains, and then you've got it. You've got it covered. It's a little bit more. It's a little bit more calories than 140. It ends up at like 165, but hey, it's better to overcount than undercount, right? So that's probably what I would do with that. Is that the greatest choice? Am I advocating this? Probably in the airport maybe if you have nothing else, but at home you can control your stuff a little bit more. And you can pick something that's a little different. But I wanted to get something that was real common. So that's why I chose that. It's in every convenience store. So, and it definitely would be a better choice because it has whole grain oats as the first ingredient than a candy bar would be, right? So it's all relative. So a better choice. All right, let's do another one that's completely different, okay? This one is a kind bar. And first of all, you probably noticed that the calories are quite a bit more, right? It's also a bigger bar. If you've ever seen these, they're bigger than the little granola bars are. So bigger bar, okay? But then we're going to look at the ingredients. What's the first ingredients on this one? Peanuts and almonds, and then it's got the glucose syrup or, the sweetener that it's got in it. So if with the peanuts and almonds being the first thing, What group should we talk about first to how to count it? The proteins, right? Or fats, but we're going to go protein this route, okay? So on the proteins, if you'll look at your chart, how many calories of those 250 would be like one serving of protein? 70, okay? So that pulls it down to what, 180 after we pull that out? Okay, that we have to consider what to do with. And what else is in there? Can you read anything else in those ingredients? We read the glucose syrup. There's some soy protein isolate, okay? Chicory root fiber, some different things. Chicory root fiber is kind of a grain, okay? So obviously there's some carbohydrates in there, probably from the corn, the syrup, and the chicory root fiber. So we took out the protein, and if you'll also check on the ounce of protein, we said it was 70 calories. How many grams of protein are in a protein? 7. Okay, so that would use up how much of that? So we have 12 grams of protein in that bar. So if you counted it all as protein, it would use up 1.5. But we're gonna say that part of that grain is probably going to be, part of those proteins are going to be from those starches. Okay, because starches have some too. If you look back at your chart, there's 3 grams of protein in one starch serving. So there's going to be some protein in grains. So just because you see protein there doesn't mean it's all from the nuts. Okay? So there, if we use 7 grams of that protein, that means we have 5 left. And then we've got some fat also that we have to deal with, right? It's quite a bit of fat when there's nuts involved, right? So if we have a protein and we decide we're going to use the carbohydrate, the 17 grams of carbohydrate, remember how much did I say was a grain earlier? So 15, right? So we probably count it as a grain. So we've got a protein, we've got a grain, and then we've got some fat that we need to deal with. We've got how much total fat in this bar? 17 grams of fat. So part of the fat is going to belong with that protein that we took out earlier. If you'll look at that little chart, there's how many grams of fat in a serving of protein? 5. Okay, so we can take out 5 of them because we already accounted for them. So then we have 12 left. So about how many fat teaspoons would that be based on our previous discussion? If you got 12 left, about 2. Okay, so what we ended up with was what? And when they're going to check ourselves, we got a protein, we've got a grain, and we've got 2 teaspoons of fat. So if you add all that together, that's 240 calories. If you're just going by checking yourself back against those calories, then you've got it all accounted for pretty much. I mean, you're like 10 calories off. Not a big deal, right? So that one's a little harder because it has the nuts mixed in there, you know, and then the sweeteners. And I'm not saying that this, again, is the perfect choice because there's those sweeteners in there are going to be empty calories. They're really not going to provide you with the nutrition that the grain is going to give you. But it does help you allow for those calories so that you can see, okay, well, this is what I have left to work with, you know, for the rest of the day. Does that make sense? Anybody have a question about that? I see some going yes and some going no. So, okay, we'll do some more. This will help. Let's move on a little bit to restaurant. This one will be a little bit easier, I think, than that one. The bars and all the things like that, if there's a lot of ingredients, it gets kind of, but the main thing is that you're allowing enough calories and servings to say, okay, I've already had 250 calories. If you don't take out enough servings, if you say, oh, I'm going to count this as a meat and a grain, then all you're taking out based on that chart is like 150 calories. You're not taking out 250. You know, so you need to make sure that you're allowing for that in your servings. It's kind of like deal a meal. You know, years ago, Richard Simmons, you had so much of everything, and when you had it, you moved it over. So after you had that bar, you needed to move over that ounce of protein, that ounce of grain, and those 2 teaspoons of fat, so they're gone. You know, and then you have the others left to deal with.